Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into some more Godzilla?
Always ready for some giant monster action.
Today we're looking at a film that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle.
I know what you mean.
But it's super important for understanding how the whole Godzilla franchise evolved.
I agree completely.
We're talking about Godzilla Raids Again.
The 1955 Japanese release,
That's the one.
not the Americanized version.
Definitely not. We'll get to that later.
Looking forward to it.
I've been digging through all sorts of materials for this one.
Oh yeah,
Encyclopedias, reviews, production notes, you name it.
sounds like a real deep dive.
That's the goal, to give everyone a fresh perspective.
Love it.
So why is Godzilla Raids, again, so important?
Well, it's the film that really sets the template for what we think of as classic Godzilla.
How so?
The monster versus monster battles, the crazy destruction.
Starting to get the picture.
Even the way Godzilla's portrayed, more primal, more animalistic.
It's all there, right from the start.
Exactly.
So it's not just a rehash of the original masterpiece.
Not at all. Toho started experimenting with the formula, seeing what else they could do with these giant monsters.
That's exciting. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
What's the story of Godzilla Raids Again?
Okay, picture this. Two pilots, Tsukioka and Kobayashi, they're out scouting for fish.
Seems pretty normal so far.
Right. Totally ordinary job, until their plane crashes on a remote island.
Oh.
They stumble out of the wreckage and bam! They come face to face with not one, but two giant monsters.
You're kidding.
And the monsters are locked in this ferocious battle.
Not the kind of in-flight entertainment you'd expect.
Definitely not.
So who's Godzilla fighting this time?
This time it's Anguirus.
Anguirus.
Yeah, he's this spiky, armored dinosaur.
Frickin' Ankylosaurus.
That's the one. And the film hints that Godzilla and Anguirus have this ancient rivalry, like way back from prehistoric times.
Whoa, that's pretty cool. Adds a whole other layer to the fight.
Definitely. But back to our pilots, they can't exactly just tweet about what they saw, right?
No signal on a remote island, I'd imagine.
Exactly. So how do they tell the world about this new threat?
Good question. How do they...
No, they manage to get back to civilization, and they elude the authorities.
Yeah.
And guess who shows up?
I don't know who.
Dr. Yamane.
From the original Godzilla.
The one and only. He's still the voice of reason, the scientist who understands these creatures better than anyone.
It's great they brought him back.
It really is. But he also brings a grim reminder. The oxygen destroyer, the only thing that worked against the first Godzilla, it's gone.
Oh, no.
Yeah, talk about a problem.
So how are they going to stop these monsters this time?
It's a real challenge.
Without that super weapon, what are they supposed to do?
Well, the JSDF comes up with a pretty risky plan.
Oh.
Based on Dr. Yamane's research.
What's the plan?
They believe Godzilla has developed a real aversion to bright light.
What?
Maybe it's some kind of trauma from the hydrogen bomb.
That's interesting.
So they decide to try a citywide blackout in Osaka.
A blackout.
And they'll use flares to lure Godzilla away from populated areas.
That sounds, well, counterintuitive. Godzilla's a walking nuclear reactor. Why would light be a problem?
That is a great question. And it gets to one of the really interesting things about this film.
What's that?
The filmmakers seem to be moving away from all the science stuff from the first Godzilla.
Interesting.
This time they're going for a more instinctive, almost animalistic portrayal of Godzilla.
Okay, I see.
The aversion to light isn't fully explained, but it adds to this idea of Godzilla being driven by primal urges.
Instead of, like, calculated evil.
Exactly.
So did this crazy blackout plan actually work?
Well, at first, yeah, but then things get complicated.
Yeah.
And you won't believe who messes it all up.
Who?
Escaped convicts.
Wait, what?
Yeah, there's this whole subplot with escaped convicts.
That seems kind of random.
It does, but their escape attempt leads to a massive explosion at an oil refinery.
Oh, no.
And what's more tempting to a giant radioactive reptile than a raging inferno?
Oh, man. Talk about bad timing.
Exactly. Godzilla is drawn back to Osaka by the flames.
So much for the blackout.
And to make matters worse, Anguirus follows the same flares they were using to keep Godzilla away.
That's a disaster waiting to happen.
And it does. Osaka becomes a total battleground.
I can only imagine.
But hey, let's talk about the production for a minute.
Okay, sure.
Our sources say that Godzilla Raids Again was made super fast,
How fast are we talking?
only 5 months after the original.
Wow, that must have been intense for the filmmaker.
Oh, absolutely. The special effects team, led by the legendary Eiji Tsuburaya, they had to work incredibly quickly.
I bet.
They even made a whole new Godzilla suit for this film.
Really? What was it called?
It was called the Gyakushigoji.
Gyakushigoji. What does that mean?
It means reverse attack Godzilla.
Ah, I get it. So for those of us who aren't, total Godzilla experts, what's different about this new suit?
Well, it was lighter and more mobile than the original suit.
I can see why they'd need that for all those fight scenes with Anguirus.
Exactly. But that rushed schedule definitely had an impact on the finished product.
Oh, I bet. What kind of compromises did they have to make?
Well, there's that famous scene where Godzilla and Anguirus seem to be moving super fast.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Turns out it was a total accident. They accidentally shot some of the footage at a slower frame rate.
Really?
Yeah, so when they played it back at normal speed, the monsters looked way faster.
Wow. A happy accident, I guess.
You could say that it became a signature part of the film.
Do you think the accidental speed up might have influenced later Godzilla films?
It's definitely possible. Tsuburaya was always looking for ways to push the boundaries of special effects.
I can see that.
So it wouldn't be surprising if that accidental discovery gave him some new ideas.
It makes you wonder. Okay, we've got to talk about the music.
Oh yeah, the score.
The score for Godzilla Raids, again, was by Masaru Sato.
Who went on to become a real legend at Toho.
Exactly. But this particular score isn't considered one of his best.
It's true, it's not his most memorable work.
Why do you think that is?
You know, it's fascinating to listen to this early score, knowing what he did later on.
Yeah, it's like a glimpse into his development as a composer.
Right. And you can hear how his style evolved over time.
So maybe it was just a case of him finding his voice.
Could be. Or maybe the tight production schedule played a role.
Maybe a bit of both.
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely something to think about.
It's these little details that make these deep dives so much fun.
I agree. Uncovering all these hidden connections, the behind-the-scenes stuff,
It really adds to the whole viewing experience.
it really does. And speaking of enriching details, we can't forget about the human element in Godzilla Raids Again.
Oh, yeah. It's not just monsters smashing buildings.
Not at all. There's this whole layer of human drama going on amidst all the chaos.
Tell me more.
Well, it all revolves around this love triangle.
Oh, a love triangle.
Yeah, between Tsukioka, one of the pilots,
Okay.
his friend Kobayashi,
Okay.
and Hidemi, the daughter of Tsukioka's boss.
Oh.
At first, it might seem like a typical romantic subplot, just thrown in there.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
But it actually does something really interesting.
What's that?
It highlights the human cost of all these monster battles.
Oh, I see.
It adds this emotional depth that you don't always see in these kinds of films.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the spectacle of it all.
Exactly.
But this love triangle, it reminds us that there are real people caught in the middle of all this.
Facing real consequences.
It's not just fictional fun and games.
Right. And it raises the stakes in a way that pure monster mayhem just can't.
I agree. It makes the whole thing more meaningful somehow.
Exactly. And it all leads up to this incredibly powerful scene.
What happens?
Kobayashi sacrifices himself to distract Godzilla.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he buys precious time for the JSDF to put their plan into action.
A true hero.
A classic sacrifice. And it adds this layer of tragedy to the film's already pretty bleak outlook.
You're right. It's not exactly a lighthearted movie.
Not at all. But it's a powerful reminder that even when facing these unstoppable forces of nature...
Like giant radioactive monsters.
Exactly. Even then, it's the human stories that really resonate.
The acts of courage, the selflessness.
That's what makes us human, right?
Absolutely. But speaking of unstoppable forces, how do they finally deal with Godzilla this time?
That was the big question.
No oxygen destroyer, remember?
Right, so what's the plan? Well, in the end, they use the environment to their advantage.
How so?
The final battle takes place on this icy island.
Oh, interesting.
And they manage to trigger a bunch of avalanches.
Avalanches.
Yeah, they bury Godzilla alive under tons of snow and ice.
Wow. That's pretty clever.
Right, it shows how resourceful humanity can be.
Even when facing these overwhelming odds.
Exactly. And that icy landscape, it's such a contrast to the fiery destruction in Osaka.
It really is. It's like the film is playing with these two extremes.
Heat and cold, fire and ice.
Like symbolic representations of the forces at play.
I like that. And it's not just visual either.
What do you mean?
That icy island, it also emphasizes how isolated Godzilla is.
Oh yeah, he's all alone out there.
Trapped on this barren, frozen wasteland.
He kind of makes you feel sorry for him, even after all the destruction he's caused.
Right. It adds a touch of pathos to his character.
That's a good word for it.
And that final shot of Godzilla buried under the ice, roaring in defiance.
It's haunting.
It really is. It doesn't feel like a clear victory, does it?
No, not really.
There's this sense of sadness, of loss.
Even Tsukioka, he seems kind of haunted by the whole thing.
That final line where he whispers to Kobayashi's spirit, "We've won. It's so quiet, but so powerful."
You can feel the weight of everything they've been through.
They might have won the battle, but at a terrible cost.
And you get the feeling this isn't the last we'll see of Godzilla.
Right. That open ending, it's like an invitation for more stories.
For Godzilla's legacy to continue.
And continue it did.
I can't wait to hear more about that.
We'll get there. But first, we need to talk about something really important.
Oh, what's that?
The reception to Godzilla Raids Again.
What did people think back in 1955?
Well, it was a mixed bag, actually.
Really?
Some critics loved it. They praised the special effects and the action.
Especially that final battle on the icy island, I bet.
Exactly. But others thought it was too similar to the original.
I could see that.
They felt it lacked the emotional impact and social commentary of the first film.
Which makes sense. The original Godzilla was a real game changer.
It really was. It must have been tough to follow that act, especially with so little time.
Absolutely. But even if Godzilla Raids, again, wasn't quite as groundbreaking as its predecessor.
It still played a crucial role in shaping the franchise.
How so?
It established that monster versus monster formula.
That's right.
It introduced a new creature, Anguirus.
Another fan favorite.
And most importantly, it left audiences wanting more giant monster action.
And that's what led to all the amazing kaiju films that came later, right?
Exactly. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's dive a bit deeper into the world of Godzilla Raids Again.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
So this love triangle, it doesn't just sit there in the background.
It really ties into the bigger picture.
Exactly. It shows us what these monster battles really cost.
In human terms.
Exactly. There's this real emotional depth that often gets overlooked in monster movies.
You're so right. We get caught up in the spectacle, the action.
Totally. But this love triangle reminds us there are real people caught in the crossfire.
With real lives at stake.
And it leads to this truly heartbreaking scene.
Oh no, what happens?
Kobayashi, he sacrifices himself to distract Godzilla.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a classic hero moment.
To save everyone else?
He buys time for the JSDF to execute their plan.
Wow, that's heavy stuff.
It really adds a layer of tragedy to the film.
You said it.
And it shows that even facing these incredible forces,
These giant monsters.
it's the human stories, the courage, the sacrifice that really stay with us.
Powerful stuff. But okay, back to the main event.
Godzilla.
How do they finally stop him this time?
Well, they don't have the oxygen destroyer anymore.
Right, we talked about that.
So what do? They use the environment itself.
How?
The final battle takes place on this icy island.
Interesting choice.
And they figure out a way to cause a bunch of avalanches.
Avalanches. To stop Godzilla.
They bury him alive under tons of snow and ice.
Wow, that's actually pretty ingenious.
It is. It shows how resourceful humanity can be.
Against all odds.
Exactly. And think about the visual contrast.
From the fiery destruction in Osaka.
To this desolate, icy landscape.
It's like fire and ice, representing these primal forces.
Right. And that icy island, it also emphasizes how isolated Godzilla is.
He's all alone out there.
Trapped on this barren wasteland.
It almost makes you feel sorry for him, even after all the chaos he caused.
That's the brilliance of the film. It gives Godzilla this element of tragedy.
And that final shot of him, buried under the ice, roaring in defiance.
It's haunting, isn't it?
It really is. It doesn't feel like a happy ending exactly.
There's this sense of melancholy, of loss.
Tsukioka, he seems really affected by everything that's happened.
Remember that line at the end? He whispers to Kobayashi's spirit, "We've won."
So quiet, but so full of emotion.
They won the battle, but at a terrible cost.
And you just know, this isn't the last we'll see of Godzilla.
That open ending, it's like a promise of more to come.
For Godzilla's story to continue.
Exactly. And you know what? The audience loved it.
Really?
Godzilla Raids, again, was a box office hit in Japan.
I guess people were ready for more giant monster action.
They were, even if this Godzilla was a bit different from the original.
It's like watching a franchise evolve right before your eyes.
They were experimenting, trying new things, building on what worked before.
And it's amazing to see how those early experiments shaped the Godzilla we know and love today.
Speaking of evolution, we have to talk about one of the biggest innovations in this film.
What's that?
The monster versus monster battles.
Ah, yes.
This is where it all started. Godzilla Raids, again, set the stage for all those epic showdowns that came later.
With King Ghidorah, Mothra, Rodan.
Exactly. They tapped into something primal, something audiences couldn't resist.
These titanic clashes of nature. It's pure cinematic magic.
But hey, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how the film was received back in 1955.
What did the critics think?
Well, the reaction to Godzilla Raids, again, was pretty mixed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of all over the place.
I bet. It had to be tough to follow up the original.
Absolutely. Godzilla was a landmark film both technically and thematically,
A hard act to follow.
especially with such a short turnaround time for the sequel.
Yeah, 5 months. That's crazy.
But even if Godzilla Raids Again didn't reach the same heights,
It's clear it was a huge step for the franchise.
totally, it really set things in motion.
In what way?
Well, it solidified the monster versus monster formula.
Right. That became a Godzilla staple.
It introduced Anguirus.
Another iconic kaiju.
And it proved that audiences were hungry for more giant monster action.
That hunger led to even more amazing creatures, right?
You got it. During that 7-year gap before the next Godzilla film.
King Kong versus Godzilla, if I remember correctly.
That's the one. Toho was busy creating all sorts of new monsters.
Like Rodan and Mothra.
Exactly. They were refining their special effects, experimenting with different stories.
It was a period of incredible creativity.
And you can see the influence of Godzilla Raids, again, in a lot of those later films.
So this somewhat flawed, often overlooked sequel.
It actually laid the groundwork for a global phenomenon.
That's amazing. That shows you the power of these stories, these creatures.
They tap into something primal, something that resonates with audiences everywhere.
But before we wrap up, I have to ask,
Sure.
for our listeners who might be most familiar with the American version.
You mean Gigantis, the fire monster?
Yep, that one. What are the key differences they should know about?
Oh man, where do we even begin? Gigantis, the fire monster, is a classic example of how localization can totally transform a film.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
They took the original Japanese film, chopped it up, added new scenes, stock footage, even changed the music.
Wow, they really went all out.
And of course, they renamed Godzilla to Gigantis.
Why would they do that?
It's almost like they were embarrassed to release a sequel.
Like they were trying to pretend it was a totally new monster.
Right. And in the process, they stripped away a lot of the nuance, the thematic depth of the original Japanese version.
Oh, that's a shame.
It really is. The American version is way more focused on the monster action.
Which I guess makes sense for American audiences at the time.
But they sacrificed the character development, the social commentary, all the things that made Godzilla Raids Again so compelling.
It's like they missed the point entirely.
You could say that, but thankfully the original Japanese version is easy to find these days.
That's good news.
So people can finally experience the film as it was intended.
And I have to say, it's a much richer, more rewarding experience.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that context is everything.
And that sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that make us think.
That challenge our assumptions.
Exactly. So, Godzilla Raids, again, maybe not a perfect film.
But full of surprises, unexpected twists.
And a Godzilla that's both terrifying and oddly sympathetic.
It's a film that deserves to be seen in its original form.
A film that helped shape the entire kaiju genre.
And paved the way for all those incredible monster movies that followed.
And it still has something to say, even today.
About our relationship with nature, with technology, with the destructive forces inside all of us.
It's a reminder that the best stories are the ones that embrace complexity.
That challenge us to look beyond the surface.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So if you haven't seen Godzilla Raids Again,
especially the Japanese version,
I urge you to seek it out.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
And remember, sometimes the most overlooked films hold the greatest treasures.
That's the beauty of exploration, right?
Exactly. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep diving deep.
See y'all next time.